It took Leah a long time to decide what to wear to Rebecca's funeral. Anxious that she might be the only English among the mourners, she didn't want to stand out any more than necessary. After much deliberation, she chose a simple black denim jumper and added a white t-shirt underneath. She brushed her dark hair and plaited it into a French braid. She wore no makeup, not even lip gloss. She drove slowly to the farm, often following black buggies headed in the same direction. When she arrived, she saw a long line of buggies parked in the farmyard and along the country road fronting the farm. Younger kids helped with the horses, tying reins to hitching posts. Leah also took note of several cars. Glad not to have driven the only automobile, she again parked at the far end of the Longacre property and walked to the house. The first person that she saw in the yard and recognized by name was Martha Dewberry. Martha's eyes were red from crying. "This is the worst thing that has ever happened," Martha said to Leah. "Rebecca was so sweet, so young." Leah agreed. She felt no animosity towards Martha. There was no rivalry between them now. In the shared experience of grief, they were only two teenagers, mourning the loss of a friend. "I'll miss her," Leah said. "She talked about you all the time. She thought you were glamorous." Martha managed a smile. "Like a movie star." "You're kidding. I didn't know she even knew what a movie star was." "She peeked in our magazines, the ones we stuff under our mattresses. My friend and I used to do the same thing," Leah said. "Hide the things we didn't want our parents to know about. It isn't easy growing up Amish. The things of English are very tempting." "Your Amish ways are tempting too," Leah said. "I guess neither way is easy." Leah left Martha and slipped into the house. The furniture had been removed from the dining room and parlor. Wooden benches had been set in long rows. An usher, a young man Leah recognized from Jonah's group of friends, showed her to a place on one of the benches. Rebecca's coffin had been placed at the front of the room, and the Longacre family sat in front of the coffin with their backs to the rows of mourners. As the mantel clock struck 9, a man stood, removed his hat, turned towards the others, and began to quote scripture from the Old Testament. Eventually he mentioned Rebecca and the loss of her young life. But the man mostly talked to his audience about living godly lives and preparing themselves for eternal life. He quoted, "The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Leah thought it a strange eulogy. At her grandmother's funeral, the minister had talked about Grandma Hall and her rich, full life. He mentioned how much he'd missed and shared personal things about her life. Leah only seen the back of Ethan's head, but she wondered if he would have liked the minister to say more in praise of Rebecca. Leah certainly wished that the man had, but it wasn't her place to criticize either. Once the first man sat down, another stood and spoke. He also had little to say about Rebecca, but instead reminded all the Amish youth, no person knows the hour of his death, so all must live good lives. Stay away from sinning. Leah shifted uncomfortably. Nothing either man said seemed to adjust the loss of Rebecca. She wondered if anyone was receiving comfort from these speeches. Eventually the second man asked the group to kneel. He read a long prayer in German. Songs were not sung but spoken in German, and just when Leah thought she couldn't sit for one more minute on the hard, uncomfortable bench, the congregation was asked to vacate the room. The room would be rearranged, and the mourners would file past the coffin for one final farewell to Rebecca. Leah almost panicked. She couldn't look at Rebecca. She couldn't. And yet, when the time came, she found herself in a line in front of a young woman who was holding baby Nathan. The child grabbed at Leah's braid, and Leah turned and smiled at him. The baby gave her a slobbery grin. The woman holding him spoke to him sternly, and Nathan's lower lip quivered. Leah turned back toward the coffin, and with her heart hammering hard against her ribs, she stepped beside the plain pine box and looked down. The lid was formed in two halves. The top half was raised, and inside lay Rebecca. The child was dressed in white, the color for Amish mourning. Her head was covered with a white prayer cap, the ties fastened neatly beneath her chin. Leah wanted to untie them and let them hang loose, as Rebecca always had in life. Leah's hand began to shake, and her knees went weak. Rebecca looked waxen, like a store mannequin. From behind her, Leah heard Nathan squeal, "Becca!" She turned to him, open his arms from his dead sister's hug. The baby's lack of understanding unglued Leah completely. She bolted from the line and darted out of the door. She pushed past people standing in the yard and sobbing started to run. Leah knew that they were staring at her, but she didn't care. Blinded by her tears, she ran. She hit the boundary of the woods. Her heart was pounding. Her lungs felt on fire. But she didn't stop running until she came to the great rock in the clearing where Ethan had brought her that moonlit night at the beginning of the summer. Leah slumped against the great boulder, then slid to the ground. Fighting for breath, she buried her face in her hands. She knew she was missing the procession to the gravesite. She knew she wasn't going to see them lower Rebecca's coffin in the ground and cover it with dirt. She didn't care. She couldn't watch anyway. Slowly her sobs lessened. Her ragged breath calmed, and quiet settled all around her. Above her she heard a faint breeze whispering through the pine needles. The faint scent of evergreens filled the air, and then she faintly heard someone say her name. Leah. Expectantly she raised her head. Her breath caught in her throat. Less than 50 feet away at the edge of the clearing, Leah saw Gabriella, dressed Amish. And beside Gabriella, Leah saw Rebecca. She wore the white dress Leah had seen in the coffin, and the prayer cap too, except that the ties were loose and fluttering. In her hand she held a lace-edged hanky. Rebecca's face looked radiant, as bright as sunshine. She raised her hand and gave an excited wave, and then looking up at Gabriella, turned with her, walked away, and disappeared behind the trees. Stunned, stupefied, Leah took several seconds to react. She scrambled to her feet and raced into the woods, calling Rebecca, Gabriella, where are you? Please come back. Leah spun in every direction, straining to see shapes in the thick foliage. Long shafts of sunlight hung in the air like yellow ribbons. A lone butterfly circled lazily over a cluster of flowers. Otherwise, Leah was alone. Gabriella was gone. Rebecca was gone. All that remained was the faint, sweet scent of pine. Leah remained in the woods until she was certain the burial was over and the Amish neighbors had gone home. She kept trying to replay in her mind what she'd seen. Gabriella, Rebecca, holding hands. They had form and substance. They had not been ghosts nor figments of her imagination. She'd seen them with her eyes wide open. She left the woods and walked back to the house. Leah stepped up onto the porch and rapped gently on the door. Ethan came, and when he saw her, he opened the screen door wide. I've been worried about you, he said. I saw you run away. Where did you go? Are you all right? Yes, Ethan, I am all right now. I'm sorry I ran off. I've been in the woods. Can I talk to your parents? He glanced over his shoulder. We are having a Bible reading and a prayer time. Maybe tomorrow would be better. It can't wait, Leah said, her heart pounding. Please. He took her into the parlor. The room was back in order, with no sign that a crowd of mourners had filled it only hours before. The family sat in a small circle. Baby Nathan played on the floor. Mr. Longacre closed the Bible on his lap and stood. His expression was one of deep sadness mixed with weariness and surprise. We are in mourning, Leah. Leah squared her shoulders. I'm sorry to barge in on you, but something happened today that I must tell you about. Quietly, her voice trembling, she told them what she'd seen in the woods. When she finished, she peered anxiously from face to face. The circle of eyes stared back at her. Don't you believe me? Please tell me you believe me. Mr. Longacre cleared his throat. We have all had a great shock, Leah. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us. I tell you, I saw them both. Perhaps you fell asleep and dreamed this, Mrs. Longacre suggested with a quivery voice. Leah shook her head vehemently. I was wide awake. I saw Rebecca and Gabriella today. I know Rebecca told you about Gabriella and how Gabriella visited us in the hospital last December. Mr. Longacre looked sterner than ever. This is a hard thing to accept, Leah. The dead do not appear to the living. We will not see Rebecca again until we meet her in heaven. Tears of frustration welled in Leah's eyes. How could she make them believe her? I tell you, I saw her. Her voice sounded frantic to her own ears. Leah, stop, Mr. Longacre commanded. Ethan was by Leah's side instantly. Papa, do not be angry. I know Leah. She would not make this up. Rebecca waved a hanky at me, Leah said, still desperate to make them believe her. You should go, Mr. Longacre said. Jacob, wait, Oma said, and everyone looked her way. She stood shakily, her face ashen. I believe, Leah, early this morning I had asked to spend a few minutes alone with Rebecca's coffin. Ja, I remember. Oma's eyes were bright with tears. I placed a hanky in her hand. I tucked it in carefully so that no one would see it. It was a favorite of hers, and I wanted her to have it with her. No one could have known about the hanky except me. I acted as a foolish old woman, but she was such a precious child to me. Leah felt suddenly giddy, as light as a feather. She wasn't going crazy. She had not imagined anything. I saw her, Leah repeated softly. I truly did. The room was absolutely silent. Finally, Jacob Longacre gave a slow nod. So be it. Tilly reached for Leah's hand. Oh, Leah, God has given you a wonderful gift. Just as he did last Christmas, Charity added. You all believe me? Leah asked again, relief draining her, making her very bones feel rubbery. What you have told us brings us peace, Mrs. Longacre said. Tears started down Leah's cheeks. Thank you, she said simply. She felt Ethan squeeze her hand. She turned, and with her head held high, left the room.